I didn't necessarily have a queer role model in my life, so I have to be that queer role model for younger folks in my family as well. My name is Malika. I'm an artist and musician. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. The main hub is offeringrain.com. You can find my music on there, my paintings, my designs, and I think my socials should be connected on there, but on every platform I'm at Offering Rain as well. It's a core part of my being to have a routine, especially these days. I do a little bit of breath work in the morning. I feel like because being an artist can mean a lot of things, it also means having an irregular schedule. So I like to really begin by grounding myself. Every day really looks different, but I am striving to optimize creativity and being sensitive and being kind. I have a long-winded answer to what being an artist means to me, and it just feels like being. I am a painter, I'm a DJ and a musician, meaning I produce and sing. I actually started with painting because I grew up in an artist building, raised by a single parent father who is a painter. I identify as queer and oftentimes non-binary. I also identify as Ecuadorian and Indian. I grew up in New York City. I was born in Queens and I grew up in Lower Manhattan. I think of community in layers. So the first layer I think of is me and my dad. My dad raised me as a single parent. The second layer would be the building that I grew up in. And it's a community of artists, writers, actors, just varying degrees of self-identified artists. So I grew up kind of submerged in that from ages 4 to 24, just 20 years. I grew up thinking everyone was an artist. That was very formative for me. My dad took me to galleries as a kid. I was like a little gallery kid. I still strongly feel that everyone is an artist, but I know that some people are self-identified artists and some people do not identify as an artist. But I feel like that was my first community, was that building that I grew up in. The next layer, which is my city, and I feel also really formative, especially considering how my parents met. My parents both migrated from their respective countries and they met in Queens. I feel like their story is one that could only happen in New York City. You know, a lot of people talk about New York pride. I have that. I definitely have that. Then there's all these like webs of community that exist within that as well. Like I have a community of artists that are also like my very close friends. I have queer spaces that I've created with partners. That's my community. Looking back, I think that my upbringing and the people that I was surrounded by were way more queer than I would have ever known. But I've been thinking about this recently. The building that I grew up in is in the West Village. It's affordable housing for artists, so it's like a bubble in itself, but it's also in the West Village, which has so much historical context for queer people. And like, there's just always been a layer of queerness in that building and in the communities that my dad brought me into. And no one ever said this is a queer space, but there's always queer people navigating space, and they make that space queer just by existing. And looking back, yes, there were queer people in my life, and I am reconnecting with artists that are in my building that are in a different generation than me, and I'm learning about their queerness, and it's like, wow, everyone's just here. My dad still lives in that building, so I'm there quite often, and I have a few friends there. My dad was my biggest role model, and I will probably talk about him time and time again throughout this, but he raised me on his own. He's also from another country and had to navigate applying to colleges together, figuring out like FAFSA and Pell Grants, and I feel like he has this resilience and discipline that I am actively trying to like integrate into my life. There were musicians that I can think of that did inspire me. Person that comes to mind is Prince right now. One thing that I really like about Prince is his discography, and there's like a story that I heard where he was supposed to go to a party and he had this urge to make music, so he went to go to his recording studio and make music. I think that just inspired me on the level of like, what love or passion for art or music looks like. I feel like I had several role models for different reasons. I really loved listening to Bill's story. I loved that he started in the arts, actually, and I really felt like I saw myself in him too, because he was interested in expressing himself and then also obsessed with like computers. So I felt like I thought it was really cool to see queer folks that are just like doing their absolute best and doing it very well. It's really nice to be able to see that time and time again in different fields. There's so many people I think that have made an impression on me, and I wouldn't be able to name them all. I had always known I was queer. I had always been conscious of that for as long as I can remember, but naming it a name, that happened around high school. I think because I grew up here, network of kids here, they tend to be like a little bit more open-minded. High school like is always a challenge, I think, for most people, but that was the time where I started to name my queerness. I think an ideal world for queer people in my eyes is you never have to come out and you never have to say anything about it, actually. And just being is like widely accepted. One time my dad found like a keyboard in the basement of our building and brought it home, and I was just like super fascinated with it. I had all these like really random gadgets because my dad is also an artist. He had like video, like camcorders and like audio recorders. So I started playing around with like an audio recorder, and I would like write poems that, I don't know, I was like feeling a lot like as a kid, like most kids do, and I was just like saying words and then recording audio and making like really raw sound collages, I'll call them. And then that eventually graduated into GarageBand because my dad bought me my first MacBook computer, and I started with GarageBand and I put like loops together, figured out how to write over music, and then I upgraded later, like around college. I got a program called Logic Pro where I really started to learn about production, and I went to YouTube University and I taught myself production and songwriting, and with the help of like many other people and like a lot of collaborations during that process, but reached a point of committed learning, and I'm still on that path of learning. I'd say that I really began to take it seriously in college. My cousins also kind of inspired me, but they had these like black books that they would write raps in, and I was like obsessed with that too. I had like a phase with that. I had a phase with graffiti as well. Like if I was any bit cool today, it's because of my cousins, because I was like looking at them and I thought they were so cool. So I started songwriting that way. It's just all been coming together, learning the different processes, because there's really like so much that goes into music making. I studied fine art at Fashion Institute of Technology. I do feel like I fell into that major because I was a bit lost. Like in high school, I was unsure what I wanted to do. I knew what I didn't want to do, but I didn't know necessarily what I wanted to commit myself to. And fine arts actually felt safe because I had a background like with my father. I also like went to a middle school for writers and artists and high school for writers and artists. I felt like, okay, well, I've been doing some sort of art for a while. I'm gonna just keep doing that and hope for the best. So I decided to pursue a fine arts degree. Studying fine arts at FIT, I had a pretty positive experience there. I had a lot of freedom in most of my classes. I essentially was just learning the technical side of art making, of visual art making specifically. I'm very grateful for my time in college, but I did not like it at the time that I was there. I was like angsty and also didn't really love the scheduling aspect of school, but I went through it. And then when I graduated, I still was kind of like unsure what I wanted to do or what I wanted to say with my art. I think I always knew that I was an artist even from childhood, but knowing what I wanted to say, that was actually the challenge. I'm still figuring that out, but I have a lot more clarity now than I did before, and that has taken a lot of trial and error and experimentation. I didn't really paint for like a year after I graduated. I was like a bit fed up, but when I started painting again, it came back in like a very beautiful way, and I'm very glad for that. When I think of painting and like my experience in painting, I feel that I can't really pinpoint a moment where my queerness was celebrated or invited or like clearly embraced. On the other hand, with music, I feel that there's been such a generation of queer communities in music that came out of perhaps a lack of diversity. My first like music release was very gay. It was like very sad love songs about this girl, and in some way it was like coming out, even though I was already like out, but it was like coming out in a new way. And I think that they resonated with people because they were so raw, and they were about, you know, an experience of like loving a girl and coming from like a voice like mine. I mostly feel comfortable, definitely like within the art space. Music and art space is generally a pretty open-minded. I have some really good friends that do make me feel safe. And I think another important thing for young people to do is to have authentic, collaborative friendships. I say collaborative to really mean opposite of competitive. I feel really grateful that I have friends that make me feel so safe and seen and heard, and I hope that I do the same for them. Usually if they're in the space with me, then I feel like, you know, abundant and like super loving. So I think that always makes a difference. There have been spaces that are centered on music where I am like a little bit less reluctant to share who I am, which is why I like that idea of like letting people in rather than coming out. So what I do, you know, to self-preserve is I will let people in when I feel safe, when I am comfortable. Otherwise, I don't. It is a joy to be let in. We don't have to let everyone in. We can choose like who we share ourselves with, and we can self-preserve in that way. There's obviously like moments in my life and even in certain artistic or musical spaces where I'm not going to disclose what I don't want to because I don't feel safe. I strongly feel that without modern day technology, I would not be where I am today. I may have never sang in front of an audience if I never had a computer. We need our phones, we need our computers. They've become such an integrated part of our lives, but I also strongly feel that the technology that I have helps me make my art. Technology and STEM and arts integrate in ways that I haven't even thought of yet. One thing I find interesting about the way I feel technology has supported me is that I feel that it's helped me develop an ear. I remember one professor very early on, like freshman year, was like, your time in school or your time studying or learning about, you know, the field of art or the technical stuff, he was very much like, you're gonna change the way you see. You're going to look at light differently. You're going to see the curves of a face differently. You're going to see shadows differently. He was like, he emphasized this. I can remember sort of being taken aback by what he was saying because it was very intense and like straightforward. But in the same way, I feel like I had to learn that through my relationship with music making and the software that I use. In visual arts, there's this idea of like doing master copies or studying the greats. You take a painting by a master and you replicate it just to like kind of learn the technique behind their painting. So similarly, I would listen to music and kind of in the back of my mind compare or just see like the quality difference, or, you know, what are they doing? Where are they adding certain flourishes, or where's their like silence, if there is any. I really had to become a better listener in order to advance like my music making. And then more on a literal and technical sense, like I feel like I learned how to sing a bit better because of like pitch correction or like auto-tune. There's a pitch correction software in Logic Pro, and I would run my voice through that and sort of hear where it was correcting me. And even there, I was like just starting to listen to pitch more just by seeing how it was correcting my voice. I find it funny that that software has helped me become a better singer. When I started making music, I started more on the vocalist end. I was writing a bit more than I was producing, which led me to collaborate with a lot of producers that maybe didn't always have my best interest or the same values or even just like the same aesthetics. I almost wish I had started taking myself seriously a bit younger with production. I think that for someone starting out now, I would suggest just going for it and listening to music. And early on, I would YouTube like Majid Jordan type beat, like how to make a certain type beat. Like there are a lot of short form videos that do explain a lot on YouTube. So YouTube is a really great teacher. There's always a way to make music, and I would just suggest leaning into that way. And that is going to be unique to each person. And just trust that and follow your instinct and your curiosity. That's what I would tell someone starting out. The earlier, like less technical music that I made, there's something there that oftentimes I feel like now that I know more, I have less access to that like grit, that raw emotion. I'll listen to some really old things and I'm like, wow, like I wish I could make something like that now. It's not a linear thing and learning is forever. Just go for it and do it. Financial resources is like the first thing that comes to mind. Having financial resources plays a big part in having access to learning about STEM and STEAM and the arts. I do think in many ways it is a privilege to be able to make art. There's a lot of grief in that as well, but I know that there's a lot of money on planet Earth. I'm very optimistic about the way money can move, and I just hope that there continues to be more grants and more financial resources for the LGBTQ community. In my own experience, I've had a bit of a challenge like having access to funds. I went to school off the Pell Grant, which I'm very grateful for, but without the Pell Grant, I wouldn't have been able to go to college. FAFSA was a bit of a pain, but in order to get what I got out of it, it was totally worth it. I just wish that having access to funds was like a bit more easy for folks that might not be eligible for FAFSA or interested in like non-traditional forms of education. I'm thinking now about the visibility of queer people and queer role models and how important that is. In many ways, I did have that just by being in the West Village. There was kind of queerness all around me, but to have like a figure that was openly queer and just a positive role model, that would have meant the world. And I did find that later in life. I'm thinking of like some musicians and DJs that I just like maybe saw myself in them and saw a future for myself that was deeply impactful for me. Making queer role models more visible, that can make a huge difference. And that can be like in a multitude of ways. That can be TV, cultural things, or a youth program. There was another program that I went through called the Pride Path program. They fostered like a bit of a community as well. And one thing I'm really thankful for that the Brooklyn Pride Center provided to our cohort was an intro to finance. I think we had like 2 or 3 segments where we learned about savings and budgeting, and like we got like little forms to fill out, and just really bringing like money and savings and financial literacy into my awareness. I was already interested in music by that point, but they did have a music producer come in and share their process with the cohort. I was very excited, obviously, that day to attend, just kind of introducing us to different aspects of everyday life and bringing that to us. It was very nice. I think it's important to see queer folks in STEAM for visibility. I think for young people to be able to imagine their futures in all spectrums of life, the queer lens needs to be brought into all spaces. It's going to exist whether people are conscious of it or not. To have more representation and more people speaking for themselves, really, and by extension, their communities. It's just going to make for a more harmonious and joyful world. And so I just think that it's very important that in all the ways that we can, we support queer folks and people in the LGBTQ community to enter the fields of their choice and the fields of their dreams. One initiative that I'm really proud of is this party that my partner and another co-founder and I started called Disco Auntie. I'm actually wearing like an old shirt. This is not our official shirt anymore, but we created a queer, I'm not gonna say nightlife space because we are very proactive about it not being a nightlife space. We tend to have like very early parties, and we're trying to make space for either sober or sober curious individuals and folks that just want to be home, like in time, get enough sleep. We're creating like a dance party for those folks. We're also playing a lot of global music, mostly South Asian diaspora music beyond, but I'm always gonna throw in like kind of a global fusion because I feel that that's like a core part of my identity, and I think the other DJs that we bring on really embody that fusion element of the city. We did a Pride event under the Dumbo Archway in June, which was like incredible. This is maybe my personal dream, is to create like an intergenerational dance space that's very inclusive. And I love singing and using my voice, and I also love being quiet. Another aspect of being an artist that I love is that like the research and development part, because it's like life is the research and development part, and every lived experience that I have will continue to inform my practice. I love kind of thinking about being a vessel and having a lot of open space to fill and then empty and then fill and then empty, and that aspect of art making I really enjoy. I'd love to take Disco Auntie on tour. I'd love to travel more for DJing. I think that'd be fun. So kind of a little bit more on the Disco Auntie side still. In an effort to keep myself accountable, I'd like to put out another body of musical work. I guess like long-term, like 5 years type of goal is to just have like a nice discography out and continue sharing my music and engaging more with my community in fun and surprising ways. One piece of advice that I would give my younger self is to learn my own voice, sharpen my own instinct, and make decisions for myself. Do out of love and not out of fear. For any young folks that are interested in getting into any kind of artistic field, search for mentors. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And if there is anyone within your sphere that is doing something close to what you're interested in, just ask. Like, ask about it, show interest. I think asking will always like lead to some sort of answer or more questions.